If we think about things like, let's take, for example, gut health as an alternative. You can do things like probiotics, kimchi, kombucha, fermented foods to really replenish that gut health.
Actually, a cup of milk only gives you 100 milligrams of calcium that you're actually getting and able to use. So something like bok choy, which has a 50% absorption rate, so a little 20% higher than dairy does, can give you almost the same amount of calcium in a cup of bok choy.
Complementary proteins are two or more incomplete protein sources that, when eaten together, provide all these 9 essential amino acids. And they are simple combinations that we eat every day. Rice and beans, hummus and pita bread, lentils and quinoa, and Americana favorite, peanut butter and jelly. You can have jelly for breakfast and peanut butter for dinner, and you did it.
Really well done rice and beans is a thing of beauty. I know it sounds rudimentary, but when it's well spiced and well cooked, it is a tremendous thing to eat.
Hey listeners, Dotsie here. If you listen to this podcast regularly, I have a plea for you. The production of our podcast is not free, and we desperately need your help here end of year so we can stay on the air for another season. And thanks for asking. A wonderful way to help us is to join our Circle of Champions program as a monthly donor. You'll help us move the needle towards a dairy-free future all year long at an amount that feels right to you. Your donations ensure that we can continue to expand our most vital programs and campaigns like this podcast and our kids program to reach the most vulnerable parents and pediatricians, our Killer Milk campaigns that y'all know well to bring awareness to the destructiveness of big dairy, and our lobbying efforts, which will finally provide a dairy-free milk to millions of American school children. And we have some awesome perks that are included when you join, like exclusive interactive webinars, personal updates, invites to attend our events, and some networking opportunities. Our goal is to welcome 10 new champions today. So we need you to go now, run to switchforgood.org and join our team by becoming a monthly donor today. Thank you from my heart to yours, and happy giving season. Well, hello, y'all. Welcome again to the Switch for Good podcast. Today is actually a pretty exciting day for us and for you, our listeners. This episode marks the start of something fresh as we roll out a new format that we're pretty thrilled to share. Alexandra and I are going to mix things up. I know you wouldn't expect it, but we are. And in doing so, we're also welcoming a new host to the Switch for Good podcast. And I'm going to get to that in just a moment. But rest assured, we're going to still bring you the stellar guests and experts you know and love, delivering life-changing insights to help you thrive. But now we're adding an innovative twist. Streamlined, engaging episodes designed to give you the essential information you're looking for in a way that's easy to digest and incredibly energizing. We'll be tackling your burning questions, diving into cutting-edge research, and busting myths along the way. And we love to hear your thoughts on the new format, because ultimately, this really is all about serving you. So without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce our new co-host, chef and Epicurean, and who I like to refer to as my brother from another mother, Jason Wrobel. Jason is a Switch for Good powerhouse, leading our digital marketing for the last 4.5 years, and is responsible for some of the most innovative and successful campaigns in our movement's history. Yes, that's right. He's also the author of a killer cookbook called Eternity, more than 150 deliciously easy, he says, but we're going to talk about that a little bit, vegan recipes for a long, healthy, satisfied, joyful life. He's worked with celebrity clients, earned the admiration of countless fans, and brings a wealth of knowledge and creativity to the table. So cheers to Three's Company for those of you who grew up in the early 80s. So glad to have you on, Jason.
It's my absolute pleasure. And I think this might be the first time. I don't know. I haven't verified this. We've done a lot of research and verification for this episode. One thing I did not do, but I'm assuming this might be the first time in podcast history where a guest has become a co-host. Because I was a guest on the podcast in 2020. I came to the studio with you and Alexandra, and we had a tremendous episode about purpose and passion and food and healing. And here we are almost 5 years later, and I'm a co-host. So I got upgraded. I got platinum status.
Dotsie, the one thing you forgot to say about Jason is how funny he is. That's one thing that I think guests, which I lack in spades. So Jason, you're going to make up for it in this podcast.
No pressure, no pressure, no pressure. Now I got to deliver. Speaking of delivering, this opportunity to be on the podcast has just filled me with so much joy because, a real quick synopsis of sort of my history and why I'm in this movement, why I do what I do, for any listeners who are just getting to know me in real time in this moment. I've been lactose intolerant since birth. My mom figured that out pretty quickly. So I've had a lifelong dance with food allergies, lactose, and in the 70s and 80s, when I was coming up, speaking of Three's Company in that era, it was incredibly difficult to navigate life as a young man, not having the venerable plethora of options we have now, and options not just in terms of food and amazing plant-based non-dairy options, but the research and the studies that are so robust at our behest that we often quote in the show and all of Switch for Good's content, none of that was out. It was like, I remember my mom telling me she was talking to pediatricians when I was little, and it was like we were all just navigating the wilderness together. We didn't really know what to do. So I always joke that I remember her packing soy milk, like brown soy milk in a jar to take to school, and all the kids were like, what is that brown milk? I was the weirdo. So I'm used to being the weirdo. I've been weird my whole life and lactose intolerant my whole life. And vegan for, year 27, it's going to be in 2025. So I've been doing this a long time, and I'm just so grateful to bring whatever culinary, nutritional knowledge, life anecdotes, things I've been through to support our listeners on their journey. So I'm really stoked to be here.
And I always find this interesting because a lot of when or teenagers or 20 somethings I know that are lactose intolerant, and some of them found out when their mothers were breastfeeding them, but their mothers were drinking dairy, and it was the lactose that they were intolerant to, or in many cases they also had an allergy that was a little scary when they were tiny. But you were lactose intolerant to the sugar in your human mother's breast milk.
That's correct. Yeah. So that got dicey really quickly, right? Because again, we talk about nutrition for children, proper nutrition for children. She had to really get creative about making sure she got an organic soy formula and it was nutritionally equivalent, which we talk about that all the time, how soy is an incredibly nutritionally equivalent option. But it was difficult because, again, the resources and the products weren't out there. So she had to drive all the way out to Ann Arbor. We grew up in Detroit. She was making these long drives to get this soy formula and trying to feed me calcium-rich food. And she did a great job because, here we are. People are always like, oh, how are you going to live without dairy or meat or animal products? And for me, I love to be a living example of what's possible. That yes, as a 47-year-old man who's strong and vibrant and energized, I feel fantastic and done it my whole life without dairy and 27 years without meat and animal products. So I think for all of us, we get to show up, right, with our accomplishments in not only our work and our career, but being an embodied example of living this way and doing it in a healthy, vibrant way.
Yeah, no doubt. Shall we tell people kind of run of show so they know what to expect? And we'll mix it up a little bit every time. But just so people have a little bit of an idea, we've got sort of 3 fabulous topics today. Each of us have done a deep dive on one of them. And then when that person has the mic, we'll certainly be trying to think of all the questions that the audience might have and ask those questions about the topics. But we're going to start out with some myth busting. Jason has looked deep into, raw milk and colostrum and all that hubbub that we've been hearing for at least the last couple of years, but is especially frightening now, as we've started to see in some of the major publication, WAPO and New York Times. So he's going to talk about some topics and myth bust. And then Alexandra is going to take some questions from YouTube, because we hear from y'all so often and we try to answer on YouTube, but there's really interesting, in-depth questions that you have asked. So she's going to tackle 3 of those. And then I'm going to wrap it up with one of the latest research study on total protein and being able to gain muscles, musculoskeletals, and just dig into that science a little bit, because we want to always make sure that we're bringing you guys evidence-based facts about eating whole food plant-based. So that's kind of run a show. So Jason, take it away.
Happy to. So I'm going to be leading the myth busting segment, and we've been doing this for a while on social media. We have been putting up posts for the last few years about commonly held either myths or beliefs or claims, health claims, which is going to be part of what we're getting into here, around animal products and dairy products and what they purportedly do for the human body. So one of the reasons I chose colostrum is because it was one of the top wellness trends of 2024. There was, raw milk, as you mentioned, colostrum, different animal products that supposedly can provide certain benefits to the human body. But for the listeners who have never heard of colostrum before, colostrum is it's a specific form of milk that mammals produce in the first few days after they give birth. So supposedly, in the analysis of colostrum, there are really beneficial things for baby cows, like immunoglobulins, cytokines, growth factors, high in protein, things that will stimulate cell production and differentiation, so newborn calves can grow very quickly. And this is an important thing to make a distinction of, right? It's newborn calves. So when we look at the benefits of what a lot of companies are claiming with their colostrum products, and generally it's powdered colostrum, right? We're not talking about colostrum that is bottled at the source and brought to the store shelves. I've personally never seen fresh colostrum, probably because the FDA wouldn't allow it, much like raw milk. So it's this powdered supplement that if you go to high-end cafes, like here where I'm at in Los Angeles, there's a chain called Erewhon. And it's this big celebrity mecca where the influencers and the athletes and the celebrities go and shop, and it's a big to-do. So if you go there, you'll see, okay, you can get a colostrum smoothie and the whole shot. The thing is, though, when they make claims, and I want to say this as a caveat, I'm a big proponent of doing the research whenever I see big claims on a product. I don't know how you two feel, being in the health and wellness as we are, but when I see big claims about a product, I want to do the research to see if there's actually some evidence to back up those claims. So with this, colostrum supplements are usually marketed as like strengthen your skin, improve your skin tone, heal your gut lining, improve your microbiome, activate cellular rejuvenation and increase your athletic performance. Okay.
Those are big claims.
Those
Really
are
big
massive claims, and one even said this product will help you revive whole body health.
Whatever that means.
It's kind of that's kind of dubious, isn't it? I mean, what does that even mean? So when we take a little bit of a deeper dive, we realize that colostrum as a supplement, right, not as a food category, is unregulated by the FDA. So how a lot of companies get around certain claims is they'll package things in the supplement category because natural supplements are not wholly regulated as a category in the United States, which is very interesting. So a lot of people will look at bovine colostrum for the protein, right? So on average, colostrum has about 15% protein by weight, while regular non-fat milk is about 3%. So people are like, okay, I want to boost my immunity, I want to improve my gut health, I want to get protein. Well, the interesting thing is there are a lot of other sources and caveats to this of how you can boost your immunity and how you can increase your protein and get cellular rejuvenation. So if we think about things like let's take, for example, gut health as an alternative. You can do things like probiotics, kimchi, kombucha, fermented foods to really replenish that gut health. Mushrooms are high in protein. We know lentils, legumes, tempeh, soy products, and these things are all safer. And when I say safer, it's because there are some deeper concerns about colostrum that I want to highlight. So one of them is basically that it can really screw up your immune system. If a person is immunodeficient, the higher concentrations of the immunoglobulins can actually have a deleterious effect to people that have compromised immune systems. So in some research here, it's referencing some doctors here, Dr. Catherine Stanton from the Bioservices Department at Tegasack and Kevin Linehan at the Tegasack Moorpark Food Research Center in Ireland are talking about this might not be a safe product for everyone. And this kind of goes into the raw milk conversation. We've seen a lot on social media. We've seen a lot of influencers and health freedom people, as they call themselves now, saying we need raw dairy products. But the danger in that, as we've seen, as now we're looking at avian flu in raw milk and certain bacterias, is this stuff safe to consume? So the reason I'm bringing this up is because there's no real conclusive evidence I found saying that those benefits transfer directly to humans. And second, it just sounds like there's some scary downsides to taking colostrum. So I encourage people, the listener, if you are concerned about your immunity, your gut health, protein, there are plant-based sources you can tap, as I mentioned, that will give you the same benefits and not put you at risk for some of these other downsides.
I have a question. Is this colostrum pasteurized? Because it's the pasteurization process that differentiates raw milk from the other milk that we find, well, pasteurized milk. It's the, means it's cooked at high temperature. Is this colostrum raw?
That's a great question. In the research, the research I found, Alexandra, it does not differentiate. But you know what? Let me do a little bit of a deeper dive and find in real time. That's the benefit of doing research in real time, right?
Yeah. Well, while you're doing that research, I just want to say that bovine colostrum is 70% saturated fat, and that is not good for us. It's not good for our immune system. Milk in general isn't good for our immune system, and colostrum is like high-powered milk.
Whether it's scary or not, or what it will do or what it doesn't do, it's just strange. Milk is baby food, but colostrum is tiny baby food. And it just seems just perverse and almost perverted that we're going to steal the colostrum that was meant for that tiny baby. They get it and within 24 hours of being born. And that's also, I'm sure most people know, is the same in human world,
It's
right?
really
Like that
important.
first breath. Yeah, it's super critical to brain development in human babies. I've definitely read that the colostrum that's one of the most important things that it delivers. So I just like, what are we doing? Is where I go with it. I mean, what on earth?
We're taking away the most important thing that a calf can get in the first few days.
And we're stealing it and putting it in a smoothie
Yeah.
to be what? I don't get it.
No.
Yeah, it's
Now, colostrum is
just
good
not the
for
natural order.
It is good for the immune system of the baby calf. But as
Right.
Jason mentioned, when you put something from another animal that has a strong immune empowering powers, it can also in another species really have detrimental health effects.
Mhm.
So there you go. Jason, did you find out?
Yes, powdered colostrum is a pasteurized product, indeed. The interesting thing is, as I go down this rabbit hole, is they have some studies out there about how colostrum pasteurization influences bioactive components like the immunoglobulin, like the levels of iron in it. And it looks like the heat treatment, okay, it looks like the immunoglobulins was not affected by pasteurization in this study. So the immunologically active substances are apparently not reduced through pasteurization. But again, if someone is immunocompromised or has some immune issues, this probably isn't a smart choice. And the other thing you mentioned too, Alexandra, is, these compounds, these growth factors are meant for a baby calf. And for humans, we're not growing at that same rate. And we also know through many, many research studies you've shared on this podcast and also our website, switchforgood.org, that those growth factors can also potentially lead to abnormal cellular activity, aka certain cancers. So my concern again with choosing any dairy product is that combination of growth factors, the combination of high levels of estrogen can do some really gnarly things to the human body.
I want to share This is for specifically for David Goldman, who is a scientist that does a lot of work with Switch for Good, and many of you listening may know him as the lead scientist on the Game Changers film. That's where I initially met him. He is in the middle of getting his PhD right now, actually. But he has a pet peeve, as do a lot of scientists, where us lay people will say, we're going to do research, right? This is a typical thing. You hear him in TED Talks all the time now. So I did my research. And for David, this is probably the thing that gets under the skin the most, because actual research studies are systematic investigations, right? They have clear objectives, they have methodology, they have empirical evidence, and they're peer reviewed. So when we say research, it's not research. So we're going to have to shift it to, I did a deep dive on the internet. Or I did a light dive on the internet, because I know that David will listen to some of these, because we're bringing the science forward that he has suggested that we share with our audience. And so I think that's important, really, just to make it clear for all of those out there, all of us out there that say, like, I did my research. So we clear things up with David and we keep him happy with us is really the reason. But it's also, I thought it was interesting to learn.
Well, then I will go on to my deep dive on
Yes.
my second myth that I wanted to talk about, which was this question of whether or not raw cow's milk increases testosterone in the human body. And in doing this deep dive, I wanted to look at the history of where this concept, this myth was born. And I remember growing up and, you know, being a young athlete. I was playing basketball, I was running track, cross country. And even, you know, being lactose intolerant as a young man, as I mentioned, it was this pressure to have dairy and animal products to improve performance, right? That was always the thing, is that you got to drink milk, strong bones, better performance, blah, blah, blah. Well, I wondered where sort of that mythology maybe got started. And in terms of testosterone or bodybuilding or performance, it went back to the 1960s, where there were two American bodybuilding coaches named Vince Gironda and Rio Blair. And they started promoting raw milk to their bodybuilding clients. And this was before the heyday of Schwarzenegger and the golden age of American bodybuilding. So they were ahead of their time with this. But their whole position on this was that it was the most, quote, anabolic and pure substance for men seeking to build muscle and strength in equal measure. So they started pushing raw milk, raw cream, so many things to sort of emphasize this hyper-masculine activity, right? It was this phenomenon of, like, we're going to push raw dairy so that men can be more masculine and have this embodied form of gender identity of, you know, muscular virility and demonstrate determination and ambition and strength. So they started pushing this on there, you know, to kind of push this, like, masculine strong agenda. But the interesting thing, if we go into, again, looking at a deep dive of what cow's milk actually does to human hormone levels, we know that in terms of endogenous estrogen, cow's milk is far, far higher than something like soy milk. And we know that the mythology that's been out there, at least for the, I don't know, 20 years maybe, you both might correct me on this, was that you want to avoid soy milk because it'll feminize you as a man. It'll give you gynecomastia and it'll do all these different things. So this mythology around milk building testosterone in the body is looking at things like cholesterol. There is some evidence out there that cholesterol can influence testosterone in the human body. However, it is not endemic to milk itself. Like, it's not the raw milk. It's the cholesterol increasing the testosterone that's in the raw milk. So the interesting thing is, we look at, again, estrogen causing all kinds of health issues like gynecomastia. There can be some issues related to sexual performance and ED. So it's fascinating to me to see, even now to this day, that this idea of masculinity is tied to your testosterone levels and how virile you are. And to me, if we go through sort of like the the downsides of raw milk, since we're specifically talking about raw milk and testosterone. The concern is that, again, unpasteurized milk has bacteria. It has some things that can actually create some very scary health issues in people. So I don't think that raw milk is a really solid choice, not only because it has no proof that it increases testosterone, except for the cholesterol that we isolated, but it can expose you to things like E. coli, right? Which can get people really, really sick. So raw milk is kind of a scary choice. And for me, I'm just going to use this anecdotally. I go every 2 years and get my blood panels done. This year I went and got my testosterone levels tested. And I haven't had dairy my entire life, as you know. And the doctor looked at me and he said, your testosterone levels are like a 25-year-old man. What are you doing? And I said, I've been vegan for 26 years. Like, I don't, he's like, well, keep doing it. And I told him I have multiple servings of soy every week, and his mind was kind of blown. So I think we're turning this on its head of, dairy products are not going to, they're not going to pump you up in the gym. They're not the best choice. So for me, if I look at things that are going to increase testosterone in the body, I can look at things like Chinese herbs. There's a Chinese herb out there called Sistanche that's been shown to increase testosterone. There's a whole bunch of other methodologies, and I think just stay away from the raw milk. It's too scary of a choice.
I always think too, like when with this craze of wanting more testosterone and seeking it out and thinking that you need more, and so many men not even getting it tested like you did intelligently, just like, I'm down here in Mexico, and you can just go in any clinic and get a testosterone shot, 250, 50, whatever you want. It's kind of crazy. And to seek it out through raw milk is okay, but the thought that comes to mind is like, it's a lactating mother. So you're going to be getting testosterone, progesterone, and estrogen, and quite a lot of estrogen, because nobody's filtering out the estrogen and progesterone just to get the testosterone from the raw milk. So it doesn't make sense to me. We know that how estrogen and progesterone interact with the pituitary gland for sure, and a hypothalamus gland, and suppressing the release of GnRH. This leads to decreased levels of a couple of different hormones, specifically that stimulate the follicles, the hormone follicles, and they're necessary for testosterone production in the testes and the adrenal glands. Like, you have to have that. So in biological males, you have the testes are a primary source of testosterone, so you're making it yourself. But by reducing this LH, estrogen and progesterone are lowering testosterone in your body. And so you're taking in more estrogen and progesterone. It sounds to me like it's either just they just wipe each other away, or potentially you're getting more estrogen and progesterone than you thought you were getting, and it's canceling out the testosterone that you're drinking the raw milk for.
Well said.
It just
I would
doesn't.
say any milk, whether raw or not, is not good for testosterone levels. And anyone who wants to I think most men care about their testosterone levels, not because of the levels per se, but because they want to perform in the bedroom and have a hard penis. So if you go back to hear Dr. Aaron Spitz on our show, he talks a lot about how animal foods are bad for your penis because they will block your arteries with that famous cholesterol, Jason, that you're talking about, and cause erectile dysfunction. So even though a product might have a lot of protein, for example, or something that helps testosterone, there are other things in milk that hurt you more, is what I think, Dotsie, you're saying. And we have to always look at that, because we can't reduce a food to one action. It has pros and cons, and you need to look at the whole food and all the reactions that it causes in the body.
Yeah, that's very well said. Did you know that as we age, our bodies produce less collagen? This vital protein that keeps our skin firm and supports muscles and joints starts to dwindle, leaving us with a few more laugh lines and a bit less bounce in our step. But there's good news. Yes, With Veg Vegan Collagen, you can naturally replenish this essential building block and get your glow back. Through innovative extraction techniques from nutrient-rich broccoli and carrots, they've crafted 100% plant-based collagen that effectively reduces the signs of aging. It supports skin hydration, enhances joint flexibility, and strengthens hair and nails, so you can look and feel fabulous. And the best part, there are no chemicals, no preservatives, and absolutely no animal products, just pure plant-based goodness. So stay youthful, stay active, and choose Veg Collagen. Elevate your daily routine and let nature help you shine from the inside out. You're just gonna go to vegnutrition.com. That is VEDGE nutrition.com and use code S, the number 4G, for 30% off. Right? You got it. One more time, vegnutrition.com and use code S4G for 30% off your order. Now back to the episode.
Which actually is a great segue to one of the YouTube questions, which I'll be answering today, which is, what's the best way to make sure I'm getting enough calcium without dairy? Very common question, right, Dotsie and Jason? I'm sure you get a lot. Switch for good. And I think a lot of people want to know about if a vegan diet can give them enough calcium because they want strong bones. So let me just parse this out. And I did a deep dive, Dotsie, into the search engine. But as I said, I'm not a doctor. But so let's talk about the recommended daily allowance of calcium for people in the first place. It's 1,000 milligrams for babies and adults. It's 1,300 milligrams for kids age 4 to 18. And then it goes down a little bit to 1,200 milligrams for women over 50 and men over 70. Okay. So it's between 1,000 and 1,200 milligrams. Now, 1 cup of milk has 305 milligrams of calcium. So that sounds like, wow, cool. I can get a quarter of my calcium a day by just drinking a glass of milk. But no, not so fast, because a study on Harvard's website and other studies have shown that dairy only has a 30% absorption rate. And so when you look at foods, you have to look at the absorption rate. This goes for dairy and for plant foods. So actually, a cup of milk only gives you 100 milligrams of calcium that you're actually getting and able to use. So something like bok choy, which has a 50% absorption rate, so a little 20% higher than dairy does, can give you almost the same amount of calcium in a cup of bok choy. So it's important to look at the absorption rate. Now, we always talk about eat a lot of greens. They give you a lot of calcium. And yes, on paper, things like spinach have a lot of calcium. Spinach has 260 milligrams of calcium per cup of cooked spinach, but there's only 5% bioavailability because it's high in oxalates. And this goes back to Jason, what we're talking about. Spinach is an amazing food. Just because it has oxalates that negate calcium doesn't mean we shouldn't eat it. It just means we shouldn't use it to rely on our calcium intake numbers. So, and we should probably remember that if we're eating spinach, it might rob also the other foods we're eating a little bit of their calcium too. So spinach, Swiss chard, beet greens, they have all high oxalates. Very, very healthy. Don't take them out of your diet, but they are not greens that you want to rely on for calcium. Now, foods high in phytates also block calcium, and these are plant foods only. And phytates are really good for you. They store phosphorus, and they're really great for fighting cancer and, interestingly, linked to stronger bone health. However, if phytates will lower the ability of the food of calcium to be absorbed by the human. So if you want to lower the phytate content in a food, in nuts, seeds, legumes, and grains where phytates are found, then you just either soak them, ferment them, or sprout them. Or if you cook like beans, you can reduce the phytate content by 80%. And guess what? We all cook our beans, right? So not a problem. But so basically what I'm saying is that when you look at the guidelines, they're not taking into account absorption. They're just saying, especially in meat eating countries, we have higher RDAs, recommended daily allowances, because we do consume so much dairy. In other countries that have less meat eating, the government, governments actually, the WHO, World Health Organization, actually recommends less calcium per day. So a lot of countries that eat more plants have an average daily intake of calcium and they're perfectly healthy, 400 milligrams a day, because they eat so little calcium depleting foods. Do you understand what I'm saying? Am I getting that? So that's really important to take into account. So remember, though, that foods like legumes and grains and nuts, they have been linked to higher bone density. So sometimes calcium and bone density actually are not hand in hand. And this is a very important point, because those of you who are saying, oh, this is too complicated, Alexandra, I'm just going to take a supplement. No, don't take a supplement. Supplements have been shown to not be healthy for you in other ways. They can, the calcification, they can actually affect your arteries. So it is best to get your calcium through foods. So there was, okay, let's talk about dairy. Let's go back to dairy, because I was getting down on a lot of plant foods in terms of calcium. But the problem with dairy for calcium and strong bones is it contains, and Dotsie, Jason, I know y'all know this, it contains an enzyme called galactose, which harms the bones. And a Swedish study of 100,000 men and women that were followed up for 20 years found that milk drinking women had higher rates of death, more heart disease, and a lot more cancer. And 3 glasses a day was associated with significantly more bone loss and hip fractures.
Yeah,
So
60% more, that study.
Thank you, Dotsie.
That one is just the one that I just quote all the time, because it's so shocking to people, right? They're like, wait, calcium, dairy, strong bones. And the folks that followed what our dietary guidelines tell us to get right is 3 glasses a day, and followed that 60% higher rate of hip fractures. That just is mind blowing to most people.
And for men, in a separate study, they had a higher rate of death with milk consumption, but they didn't have a higher fracture rate. And I can't explain that. And, and this also, to note, this was with milk, not with yogurt, because fermentation does destroy galactose. Dotsie, do you have anything to add? Because I've heard that the acidity in milk also can pull from the bones, but I don't.
Yeah, I've talked to David about that, and he's never been able to find the study that shows that, but you do hear that, like that it leaches calcium. So I'm just honestly not sure, because I haven't found a study. But I think one thing, just to the parents who are listening out there, because we get this a lot. Okay, you don't need dairy, and you shouldn't have dairy for your calcium because of its deleterious effects. And let's say their kid is 6 or 7, they're like, okay, I cannot now switch them to kale, and nuts. Like that's just not going to happen. You can't just stick that in front of them. So the highest calcium ounce per ounce is in sesame seeds. And so I always tell parents, go for tahini, because the kids can dip their yummy little carrots or celery or chips, and it's yummy and creamy and delicious. And so that has helped a lot of parents go, yeah, okay, I did get them to eat that. They liked it. Because it's very difficult to get a kid that is eating maybe fast food and, just quick foods at home that are processed for their taste buds to just, switch over to kale and spinach. But you've already specifically said why we shouldn't be relying on spinach for our calcium. But anyway, tahini is a magic food.
I also think too, this is the conversation about building strong bones. Calcium is obviously important. That's why we're discussing it right now. And I also think emphasizing other elements that are intrinsic to building strong bones and cartilage, like magnesium, like boron, like silica, and thinking about how we resource that in our foods as well. Because I think that so often, right, there's this emphasis on this one particular nutrient or element that we've got to get in our body. And that seems to be calcium. That's the driver of Western medicine. Strong bones, calcium. But I think it's also ignoring the importance of a well-rounded diet that contained these other elements we discussed, and also the power of weight-bearing exercise. We must do that.
Yeah. Yeah. So weight bearing exercise is really important. And that means weightlifting with heavy weights, not light weights, but heavier weights, not so you injure yourself, jumping, running, and walking with a weighted vest or a backpack. Some studies have said that walking itself really doesn't give you enough impact to have as necessary an effect on your bones. Now, there's also a couple things that you should also add vitamin D to your diet. Avoid phosphate additives, and those are a lot in sodas because phosphate is bad for the bones, and lowering your sodium, having less salt. So those are things that we can do to improve our bones. Be aware of the calcium that you're eating, but also, as Jason said, I agree, lifestyle is very important and a well-rounded diet. So that was any more comments, and I'll move on to the next question, which isn't nearly as in-depth.
Let's do it. What's next?
Okay. So the next question on our YouTube channel was, how do you make sure you're not losing muscle as you get older on a vegan diet? Is there a trick to it? Nope, no tricks. Just two things to do, whether you're on a vegan diet or not. And the first thing is, as we just discussed, is you need to lift weights. You need to lift weights if you don't want to lose muscle. It's great for bones, but it's also really important for muscle. And again, on the heavy side. And you should be lifting weights about 4 times a week is what my guru, Maxim Sagoin, suggests. And keep it like to 5. Well, when you start, you can do lighter so you don't injure yourself. You don't injure your muscles or anything. But then you should be aiming for like 5 to 8 reps. So on the heavier side, not doing 20 reps and going, okay, I'm done, and not feeling like you're really exhausting your muscles. And then the second thing to do is you have to eat enough protein. That's very important. And I personally get 1.7 kilograms per kilogram of body weight, so of protein, or it's 0.8 kilograms per pound since we are here in the United States of protein. But I work out. I lift weights 5 times a week, and quite heavy. So you might want to adjust it a little less. I do get about 100 grams of protein a day. I know we have a lot of doctors on here who say, oh, no, you don't need that. Maybe 60 or 70 or 80 are enough. But as you get older, your protein needs get higher, and you also tend to not absorb. Once again, that absorption thing, everything's connected as much. So having more protein is important. Now, this is daunting to a lot of people. They say, how can I get it on a vegan diet, all that protein? Well, an easy way to do it, rule of thumb, you can vary it, but just to start, is have a scoop of protein powder in the morning with a shake or a bowl or something, and then a salad with 6 ounces of protein during the day. That gives you about 30 grams of protein. The protein powder is usually 30 grams also. And then 1 cup of beans in the evening, which is 41 grams of protein. And then you're right around 100 grams right there. And if you're a smaller person than I or less active, then you don't need as much. So that's.
I like how you did that because it does sound daunting. It's like, woof, that's a lot. But then, the foods that you mentioned are so high in protein that you're kind of just in the 3 meals you can get it in.
Yeah, you can, especially with beans. Beans are great. Yeah. And, I love tofu because I put it in things and make it in puddings and things. But Dotsie, we had, who was it we had on? Somebody we had on recently who said I was eating.
David, the scientist, David Goldman.
Oh, okay. Yes, it was David.
Right?
That's right. And so he said I was eating too much tofu. So I've actually found a great tofu-like substance, one that was made of pumpkin seeds and another that's made of fava beans. They don't really taste anything, but when they're cut up and in stuff or put in a smoothie or a bowl, you can't taste the difference at all. They give it
amazing.
I'm also in terms of protein too. I want to say in addition to everything you discussed, Alexandra, I'm a big fan of incorporating mushrooms and I just eat a lot of shiitake, lion's mane, really nutrient dense mushrooms, which have other health benefits as well. But in terms of the protein category, in addition to the beans, the soy products, the nuts, the things you're discussing, mushrooms have been a staple of my diet for a long time. And as a chef, I'm always excited about how to create things with mushrooms that I can give to, omnivores or carnivores to give them that dense, meaty, satisfying sort of flavor. So for anyone who is not on the mushroom train yet, I highly suggest it because it's satiating, protein rich. They're just a wonderful category. And a little tip about cooking beans, because we all love our beans here. We know they're a longevity food. You look at the blue zones and the centenarians. But flatulence is usually, I know we're getting off topic here, but I had someone the other day ask me this question. They said, "Well, you eat so many beans. Are you just farting all day?" I said, "No, I'm not. I'm not farting all day, contrary to popular belief about vegans, because I always recommend taking kombu seaweed and cooking the beans with some kombu seaweed. There's a brand out there called Eden Foods that's been doing their beans like this. They have canned BPA-free beans for like 30, 40 years. But if you're cooking beans at home, you can get a package of kombu, Kombu seaweed. Put a couple strips of kombu in the water while you're cooking the beans, and that it does deactivate the compounds that cause the flatulence. So just a tip for anyone out there cooking beans at home, use the kombu.
I love that tip. Also soaking, then the longer you soak, right? The better it is. And also your gut will get used to beans and all the fiber and stuff if you introduce it slowly. And just so you know that your source of protein is, when I mentioned those three ingredients to put in your meals, most everything you eat has protein in it. So over the course of the day, you will also add to that. So you might not need all the tofu and protein powder and beans that I was talking about myself, which adds up to 100 grams because of the other things that are in our diets. I'm not going to do the third question because I want to get to Dotsie's research, but we will do it next week.
That was awesome. And Jason, I also remember you telling me maybe it wasn't your first foray into mushrooms, because that was probably quite some time ago, but you learned along the route how incredibly beneficial they are for mental health.
Yeah, that's a big one. Lion's mane in particular is something that I started working with probably like during the pandemic, because of my colleague and friend Chad Sarno and Derek Sarno. They cook with mushrooms all the time. And lion's mane, I remember running into it at the farmer's market and being like, oh my God, it's this big fluffy, it literally looks like a lion's mane. And what we've seen through some research, not research I've done, but research that's out there, is there's a guy named, his name is Alex Dimitriou. He's a double board certified psychiatrist and the founder of the Menlo Park Psychiatry and Sleep Medicine Institute. And he was looking at how lion's mane and other medicinal mushrooms can cross the blood-brain barrier. So they have been looking at lion's mane in terms of changes in behavior, loss of appetite, nervous system behaviors caused by high stress. And it's very, very interesting. So they're looking at how lion's mane might increase neurogenesis in the hippocampus of the brain, which is responsible for learning and memory. So it's very cool for me because I'm very passionate about my journey with mental health, which I might share on a future episode. But I'm always looking for natural ways to boost my cognition, boost my memory, have my mood be stable, reduce stress. So again, mushrooms are awesome. But in particular, if you've never had lion's mane before, check it out, see how you feel on it.
But it's not a psychedelic, just to be clear, because mushrooms can cross the blood-brain barrier and make you feel different. But this is not what lion's mane's doing.
Psilocybin is a different animal altogether. That's a different podcast, different episode.
We had that guy on the podcast. Not very many people listened to it, but
no, lion's mane, definitely not psychoactive. You will not be seeing Puff the Magic Dragon enter your home. No psychedelic collars. You'll be fine.
Okay.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, we can dive in. We have access to this wonderful human who we've been talking about, David Goldman, and he will pop into my inbox sometimes once a week, slow month, a couple times a month with studies, like, oh, I just read this. I mean, he knows every single study that has ever come out in the history of ever, especially when it comes to plant-based food versus animal-based foods. But he sends me this message, and in the subject line, it says, study. This is gorgeous. I've never heard a scientist say the word gorgeous. And before, I was like, what is this? So I opened it up and he says, and it was funded by Big Beef too. There were other funders of the study, but Big Beef was one of them. So I am going to tell you what the study found, but then I'm going to break it down pretty simply in a short amount of time. So the study was meals containing equivalent total protein from foods providing complete, complementary, or incomplete essential amino acid profiles do not differentially affect 24-hour skeletal muscle protein synthesis, meaning building muscle in healthy middle-aged women. This was published in Science Direct, and we will definitely have the link in the show notes so you guys can read the full study for the nerds out there. All right, so I'm gonna break it down, this complete, incomplete, and complementary proteins. So proteins, as most know, are comprised of amino acids, which are classified as essential. Okay, they must be attained from the diet, or non-essential, they can be made by our body. And this concept of complete, complementary, and incomplete proteins relates to the presence and the balance, if you will, of these amino acids. So complete proteins contain all 9 essential amino acids in sufficient quantities, I should say, to meet the body's needs. So in the animal-based world, it'd be meat, fish, poultry, eggs, milk, yogurt, something like that. In the plant-based world, you've got tofu, edamame, tempeh, quinoa, amaranth, some of the grains, okay? Now, incomplete proteins mean that it just lacks one or more of the essential amino acids in sufficient amounts. So consuming these alone may not fully support protein synthesis if it's the sole protein source. Some of those would be rice, some nuts, seeds, legumes, and some vegetables. But here's where it gets good. Complementary proteins, and here's also where it starts to make sense, this study. Complementary proteins are 2 or more incomplete protein sources that, when eaten together, provide all these 9 essential amino acids. And they are simple combinations that we eat every day. Rice and beans, hummus and pita bread, lentils and quinoa, and, Americana favorite, peanut butter and jelly on whole grain bread or whatever kind of bread. So I think when they do these deep dive studies into understanding protein and protein synthesis and stimulating muscle protein synthesis, it comes down to, yet again, which we have talked to many experts on this podcast about, nobody eats just one food, right? You wouldn't, I mean, obviously in the third world, I'm not trying to, say that is not the case for some people, but in the first world, where we're constantly debating this, am I getting enough protein and is it enough to build muscle? Most of the time, nobody's eating one food. They're not just sustaining their entire diet for many months on rice, right? Or even just on chicken, and with nothing else. So as you eat a variety of foods, a variety of robust, colorful, full of antioxidant, delicious food that you like and enjoy from the sea, from the earth, from the farm, right? Not packaged. You're going to be getting all that you need because they are complementary to each other to stimulate muscle protein synthesis to produce new muscle in every meal of every day. So it's almost one of those studies that it's like, not to worry, right? And I thought that it was a cool one to share here, because we learn yet again, right, that all sorts of plant foods are complementary to building muscle.
And the interesting thing is in the study, the researchers thought that the animal proteins would stimulate the most muscle synthesis, and that the complementary protein would be okay, and the incomplete wouldn't do it at all. Now, the incomplete did not do what they wanted. So you do need to get all the amino acids over a 24-hour period, but they were surprised that getting them in a 24-hour period as opposed to in one bite was the same in terms of muscle building. And so it's nice to see a study, like you said, that was funded by the Cattlemen's Association, among others, who didn't expect this kind of result.
Right. So it's like, you don't have to, that's a very good point, is in terms of it doesn't have to be in that same moment, that same meal. You could have jelly for breakfast and peanut butter for dinner, and you did it.
As long as it's over a 24-hour, well, their study was measuring 24-hour period.
Right.
The study was measuring by meal and 24-hour period, and they found that in the meal, it was also just as good. Complementary proteins were just as good as quote unquote
complete
animal complete proteins.
Yeah.
And then over a 24-hour period too. So however you get it in, as long as you, back to what Jason said, having variety in your diet is really important, for whether it's for calcium or for protein or for, brain health, et cetera, et cetera. So that would be the takeaway.
It reminds me of the early conversations that I had with my mother, Susan, who in the 60s and early 70s was going to Seventh-day Adventist cooking classes. In the early 70s, maybe 70 or 71, I think Francis Moore Lapé's book came out talking about vegetarianism and how in order to have a complete protein, you have to combine rice and beans. That was the big thing back then, was nut loaves. And my mom was regaling me with all these really, interesting, dense recipes they were learning at the Seventh-day Adventist cooking classes. But rice and beans were like the staple. And it makes me think about how many cultures, independent of one another, I don't know if I want to say figured this out, because I'm always very curious about where ideas come from in humanity, how you can have one culture or civilization on one side of the world and another culture and civilization thousands of miles away having sort of the same eating habits, traditions. And I say this because on my dad's side of the family, being Puerto Rican and Spanish, arroz y frijoles, rice and beans, was a staple at every meal. But then I look at one of my favorite cuisines, Japanese food. You've got brown rice and adzuki beans, or rice and soybeans. So this has sort of been a foundational thing, I think, for many generations. And really well done rice and beans is a thing of beauty. I know it sounds rudimentary, but it is, when it's well spiced and well cooked, it is a tremendous thing to eat.
I think back then, it's Francis Moore Lapé's book, Diet for a Small Planet, was the thing that inspired me to go vegetarian. And back then, I think they thought it had to be done in one meal, but now we've seen that it can be expanded over a period of time, that you don't have to have if Jason's cooking, we'll have the rice and beans together, but maybe we want the rice at breakfast and the beans at dinner, and that's okay too. So yeah, great. Thank you, Dotsie. That was really interesting.
Yeah. And I hope everyone enjoyed this, and y'all are going to let us know, because we need guidance and direction. This is for you, as I said in the intro. So, please shoot us some feedback at podcast@switchforgood.org. What do you want more of? What do you want less of? And help us out so that we can really cater this show and the information that we provide to what you're looking for.
Yeah. And thanks, Jason, for joining us. It was great. It was great.
It's my pleasure.
Hey, listeners, Dotsie here. If you listen to this podcast regularly, I have a plea for you. The production of our podcast is not free, and we desperately need your help here end of year so we can stay on the air for another season. And thanks for asking. A wonderful way to help us is to join our Circle of Champions program as a monthly donor. You'll help us move the needle towards a dairy-free future all year long at an amount that feels right to you. Your donations ensure that we can continue to expand our most vital programs and campaigns like this podcast and our kids program to reach the most vulnerable parents and pediatricians, our Killer Milk campaigns that y'all know well to bring awareness to the destructiveness of big dairy, and our lobbying efforts, which will finally provide a dairy-free milk to millions of American school children. And we have some awesome perks that are included when you join, like exclusive interactive webinars, personal updates, invites to attend our events, and some networking opportunities. Our goal is to welcome 10 new champions today. So we need you to go now, run to switchforgood.org and join our team by becoming a monthly donor today. Thank you from my heart to yours, and happy giving season.